Afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes. So, Your Excellency, delegates, and ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. We are ready to start this side event. Some of you are in the room, but this is mainly an online event, so I hope that those on the other side of the screen are able to see me and hear me properly. So welcome all of you here in the room and online for this event called Innovation Lab, Trees, Nature's Technology for Climate-Proof Building. I am Paula Deda, I'm the director of the UNECE Forest, Land and Housing Division in Geneva at the Economic Commission for Europe. It is my pleasure and honor to open this short side event during the Committee on Housing and Land Management. The event was organized by my forest team, the forest and the forest industry team, in very close collaboration with colleagues in FAO Rome, and Simone Borrelli, with whom we cooperate a lot, is here next to me. I'm not too close to Simone, not because I don't like him, but because before going into my speech, I wanted to show you something that this committee, a Committee on Urban Development, Housing and Land Management, just adopted, and that for that I'll move, and I hope the camera can follow me, hopefully so. And these are the principles for sustainable and inclusive urban design and architecture. This document is part of the San Marino Declaration adopted on Monday and signed, symbolically signed by many architects here in San Marino, but also Norman Foster and Stefano Boeri, archistars of their caliber. What our practitioners committing to is several principles. I wanted to bring you to one principle in particular: respect for nature and natural systems and processes. Every city, urban infrastructure and building should be designed in a way that limits its impact on the ecosystem of surrounding spaces, including by respecting plants, animals, and other organisms, as well as weather and natural habitats. This implies conducting ex-ante environmental impact assessment, allowing spaces for biodiversity, and using natural materials, as well as low-impact production, assembling, and dismantling processes. So that's a commitment that came from this meeting. And I think that's where we start from also doing this side event. Urbanization is one of the global demographic megatrends, and the share of the world population in urban areas by 2050 is projected to increase from 55% today to 68% in 2050. We are likely to build more. Cities are hotspots for the global carbon cycle with considerable CO2 emissions from creation and use of residential and commercial buildings. Globally, cement and steel use in buildings emitted more than twice the amount of CO2 that was reported for aviation in 2018. It is a tremendous challenge for humanity to reduce emissions arising from construction materials. Some cities have a very ambitious targets for reducing carbon emissions for the coming decades, and cities can actually achieve net zero emissions. The IPCC states in its latest report that carbon neutral cities can only happen if emissions are reduced within and outside of their administrative boundaries. This calls for cross-sectoral, beyond boundaries communication, exchange of knowledge, and cooperation, and calls for innovative approaches to find low-carbon building solutions that are economically, socially, and environmentally viable. I am very pleased that we managed to bring together very different constituencies today who are key in reducing the carbon footprint in construction. The urgency of climate change might require us not only to innovate and improve, but to do more, significantly reducing carbon emissions from urban settings in the near future might even require disruptive changes. So let's be prepared for that. And I want to highlight that the intention of today's event is not to push wood as the panacea of construction. Our intention is to showcase that many of the experts end up with wood independently from their background and starting point. So they all come to the same conclusions from different areas of interest and professions. Wood is not the only low-carbon building material, but is one of the most promising and abundant ones. All of our panelists who kindly agreed to be here and speaking today to you might come from very diverse backgrounds, but they have one thing in common. They were thinking about how to reduce the carbon footprint in construction. It was in the course of their journey that wood emerged as a champion of future low-carbon bio-based construction material. Using wood as building material is not without hurdles, and we know that. Let's see how to make it easier for everyone to use more sustainably grown wood in construction. So let me thank all the panelists and speakers for their time and commitment to present and discuss in this event. Please make use of this opportunity also to raise questions and engage actively in the discussion. I understand, Florian, that this can also be done by people that are connected online. Also, I want to express our gratitude, as always, to the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, for their collaboration, and Simone, as I mentioned at the start, Simone Borrelli, for agreeing to co-moderate the event. Without further ado, I would like to hand over the discussion now to the moderator and wish us a fruitful discussion. And I'm going to get closer to you now that I'm done with the poster here. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Paola. Thank you for being with us and for these very important opening remarks, and also for reminding us of the declaration that was signed in San Marino, which I think is a very important step in the right direction. Now, before starting the event proper, maybe I'll pass the word to Florian to give a short technical announcement, and then we'll start with the webinar proper.
Thank you, Simone. It's just a quick announcement that we will have the possibility to drop questions in the chat. It's a Zoom meeting, it's a hybrid meeting. We have people in the room who can raise their flags. But we also have people online. They can raise the flag, the questions, and I will ask the questions then to the panelists here in the room, but also online. So we have a real hybrid, and just feel free to ask questions. I will summarize them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Florian. So before we start, let me introduce myself. I am Simone Borrelli. I'm the Urban Forestry Officer at FAO. As Paola has reminded us a few times, I think we have an excellent collaboration with UNECE on topics related to urban forestry, but also other urban issues, and it's a pleasure to be here. And moderating the event with me today is Florian Steyer, who's the Economics Affairs Officer also at the UNECE Secretariat. So, without further ado, I think Paola reminded us how important or how true it is that the carbon footprints of cities, in particular of construction, is really one of the hot topics in the last, let's say, years. And right now, at this very moment, many experts on carbon neutral or reduced carbon actually meeting for a big conference on biocities in Barcelona. And so we're very grateful that Mr. Uwe Kies, who's the Secretary General from Innovawood, actually agreed to come and be with us instead of going to Barcelona, which was probably more interesting. And he will give us a keynote presentation on the new European Bauhaus, a creative and transdisciplinary movement in the making. So Uwe, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. My name is Uwe Kies. I'm the Secretary General of Innovawood, a research network of 60 research organizations in Europe, mainly in the forestry and wood science field. And we have created an alliance with industrial federations and associations representing the European wood industry called the Wood for Bauhaus Alliance. And I'd like to give an introduction to what is happening on the European scale with this new European Bauhaus movement, where many people are talking about. So, title, The New European Bauhaus, a creative and transdisciplinary movement in the making. The climate crisis is our main challenge for the future. It's coming more and more into evidence and into the public understanding that the climate crisis will not go away and we have to deal with it. What is really notable is that we understand also better that different sectors are contributing to the climate crisis in different ways. And sort of the white elephant in the room, which nobody has noticed for many years, is the building sector. In fact, the building sector, including the whole life cycle of buildings, including the demolition of buildings and the waste created with it, accounts for almost 40% of all carbon emissions globally. So this means if we want to tackle climate change, we have to address we have to decarbonize the built environment and the building sector. Especially thinking of urban growth, thinking of mega cities of the future, we cannot go on like this. And the climate crisis is also just in its beginning, as we notify. We are, if you look at the climate science, it's happening faster than expected, and there are very dreadful scenarios how the future will look like if we live in a 2-degree Celsius world. So, yeah, climate change will be the main factor in the future, leading to further collapses of the biodiversity, of social systems. Yeah. But I want to present here a positive message, and one positive message that yeah, is noted now in the European Union is this new European Bauhaus movement. It is a project that was launched under the presidency of Ursula von der Leyen, and it's basically a grassroots movement, you could call it, to support the Green Deal. Ursula von der Leyen herself has called it the heart and the soul of the European Green Deal. So creating a narrative how we can enhance the future of cities and regions and of populations living in cities and regions. So basically co-creating with the actors and the stakeholders a new paradigm for the Green Deal. And this initiative has been ongoing now for 2 years. A lot of local partners, companies, cities, regions, creators, architects have joined this movement as becoming an official partner of the new European Bauhaus. They had several prize competitions where best practices and showcases were launched. They created a lab, a think and do tank, where many of these actors can engage and share and yeah, develop new solutions together. And there was also a large festival where they showcased many of these regards. The new European Bauhaus is also entering now the European funding programs. So Horizon Europe, Interreg, Erasmus Plus, and so on, will issue further new calls in the future, really addressing also the new European Bauhaus immediately as a criteria for this yeah, funding schemes. So this has been a very active and visible movement so far, mainly driven on the side of architects, designers, creators, planners, urban public administrations. But also the industry is getting more and more interested in it. Now, representing the Wood for Bauhaus Alliance today, there is something very notable also, and that actually the whole community was quite surprised hearing the President of the European Commission in her State of the Union address when she just stepped into office in 2020 to talk about wood as a building material now. We know that the construction sector can even be turned from a carbon source into a sink if organic building materials like wood and smart technologies like AI are applied. So hearing that from the President created quite a stir in the sector. And the, let's say, mastermind behind this idea is Professor John Schellenhuber. He's a very eminent climate scientist. He's the founder of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, who has been, you know, instrumental in all these IPCC reports and in the science behind the climate modeling. he has become an advocate for bio-based materials in the last 6-7 years. And he's sort of the one who brought up this idea that we need actually a new European Bauhaus today, which takes the idea of the original Bauhaus that we need to solve with architecture, with the building, with the construction sector. We need to solve solutions of today, which are at stake, and this is the climate crisis. So how can the building sector become a key player in that? Looking at wood as a material, we have to note that this is one of the main or the very few bio-based materials who is climate neutral or can be even climate negative in the life cycle view on building. This is a very well-known building material pyramid developed by the Center for Industrialized Architecture in Denmark. And it compares different material categories regarding their CO2 footprint. And what you see here is that at the bottom of this pyramid, bio-based materials turn out who can deliver a carbon negative impact over the life cycle of the structures. Whereas the very high carbon positive materials or the medium carbon positive materials are of course the ones which are dominating the wood sector today, the construction sector and the built environment today. Why is this so? Well, trees, and if you look at the whole entire ecosystems, are living organisms and they are true carbon pumps. So trees, through photosynthesis, absorb CO2 from the atmosphere, store it in the solid biomass, in the timber, and store it also in the soil. And this is their main function. And if you think now of forests as a large terrestrial ecosystems, they are really, decarbonizing the atmosphere. And that's what they did hundreds of thousands of years ago when they stored carbon from the atmosphere into the fossil petrol resources, which we are using actually today for the energy. So trees are one big part of the solution if you ask foresters and if you ask the New European Bauhaus movement. You also have to see that trees are already the key raw material supply for a well-developed wood industry sector. The wood industry sector has various different areas of products, whereas construction materials, so timber for construction, is actually a main part of it. But you have to see it as a system of co-products. Trees do not only produce construction material, they also produce material for various other applications, like particle board, panel industries, like flooring materials, or something that is very interesting now also for the building sector are insulation materials. Actually, with wood fibers, you can create very efficient and very effective insulation panels, and which will, in the end, decarbonize also the whole building. So, cities, in that sense, could become carbon sinks if we link the forest to the long-life wood products and also to the built environment. As I just said, forests are a main carbon storage and a carbon sink already, but if you connect the dots further in the chain and if you extract timber from forests, convert them into long-life wood products and store them in the built environment, the forest can regenerate and will grow back again and will produce more timber and more carbon will be stored. So this is the unique feature of these forest ecosystems, that they really can be seen as a carbon pump on a landscape scale. However, this only will work if you look at the whole supply chain in an integrated manner, which is why digitalization and industrialization of these solutions is needed, so that we can actually trace back the timber also from the origin of the forest and ensure that the life cycle is intact. What this carbon pump also needs is, in a way, to be established as a value chain in the sector, but it has to also reach out to all these other domains that are very important in the built environment: architecture, the construction sector, urban planning, cities and regions. This has to be understood by all of these actors, that the solutions are available, it's available tested technology, and that it can be upscaled through further development. That this is not just, let's say, a crazy idea or a big vision. You can find that in the science. There are several papers and publications in the recent years, notably also from the Potsdam Institute, who address this in a modeling scenario, that actually buildings can become a major carbon sink, so that this can be upscaled on a global scale. Part of this solution will be that we afforest more forests, that we afforest unutilized lands on a large scale to produce more timber, which also has to ensure, of course, that we protect biodiversity. So we will not harvest or over-harvest existing natural forests. We will basically manage existing forests and replant new forests. And also the building systems in the sector have to evolve so that they become more circular, that the material actually can be used and reused and remanufactured after certain ways, after certain lifetimes. And this recent study of the PIC actually puts out some really interesting figures. So a transition to timber cities could avoid more than 1 billion tons of CO2 emissions by 2100. So in a very, let's say, long time scale, but this is on this massive time scale that we have to think that we can really develop the forest wood supply chain as a major lever for climate restoration. And just to show you some examples that really, this is already happening on the ground. This is a European funded project where a demo building will be built using timber construction materials, but also integrating various new engineered wood products into the facade, into the insulation materials, into the setup of the building. Or this is also another example, a new research institute founded in Isola in Slovenia with a big co-funding from the European Union, where actually all these materials and systems are applied and will be monitored in the building to demonstrate that this is possible. Wood building has become a major trend in many countries around Europe. Austria, Sweden, Finland, they are leading this. And it's a big trend. So let me close with two quotes. One quote from Professor John Schellenhuber, which was presented at a conference in the Vatican in June. This should be our motto. We have to reforest the planet and retimber the city. We have enough degraded land on this planet, about 1 billion hectares, which we could turn into vital ecosystems again, into managed forests. To restore the climate, we need to first add and support 500 billion trees, which is actually around 50 trees per every human being, which is not an immense figure per person, I would say. And second, build 2 billion homes from harvested biomass. This is the true nature-based solution. Nature did a fantastic job of extracting CO2 from the atmosphere. We need to replay this process by turning cities into organic mass. To make the built environment sustainable, beautiful, inclusive, we need to bring together high-tech and no-tech. So this is the perspective of Professor Jan Schellenhuber, and which gets really a lot of attention in various domains. But this solution, as also was already pointed out a bit, has a global dimension. So it also addresses not only Europe or the global north, it actually includes also the global south, where the climate crisis is already happening much more severe than we sense that in Europe. So this is a statement from Diébedo Francis Quéré, He's a very known architect now, as he has won the Pritzker Prize in 2022. And his quote is, "The climate crisis is real. Building materials are limited, population growth is imminent, especially in the so-called global south. And conflict will intensify because of the few resources we have. This should concern every one of us. It is not because you are rich that you should waste energy, but you have to look for alternatives. It is about combining and engineering materials which are locally available to create structures. There is hope in the world if we use the material in a very smart way." And this is actually what he is showing in his architecture, that you can use local materials and create beautiful, useful structures. So imagine if the growing population of Africa would behave the way the privileged have in the past. What will be the future of our planet? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Uwe, for the excellent presentation. Now I'd like to see if there are any questions from the floor or any questions online. Florian?
Online so far not.
Any questions from the floor? Paula, yes, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's very much in line what we promote, not only as EC, but FAO, and we are all, somehow we say, we have to be careful not to preach to the converted. That's why we are here. You're talking about architects and architecture. And I mentioned this declaration, and why? Because these principles were signed by architects. We are going down several levels, right? This is international environment. We have ministries. We are talking about including local authorities. Now we are really going down to the practitioners, because you can be a mayor and commit the construction of a big building, but then it's the architect that can make it sustainable or unsustainable. What I would like to know from you is like what you are doing as organization, but advocacy, but also to really tackle that sort of layer of society. How do you work with architects to make them move away from unsustainable solutions and more use of wood in practical ways? I mean, I know you know advocacy as well, that's also practical, but I would like to know a little bit more on how you do just target them.
Yeah, I think the main thing that we have to do is we have to show that it works, which means we need to show that these buildings are beautiful, livable, healthy, and that they are durable for a long time. So we need much more, I would say, demonstration cases. We need much more to show this kind of solutions are already working. Yeah, it's we will see later other examples, but in our field we need to demonstrate that these buildings are not burning, that they are not, people have a lot of misconceptions about wood. Wood is a very high-tech material today, and we need just to convince and build it up the trust that it's working. So this is on the, I would say, implementation side with architects, with the building society. We have to go into the schools. We have to go into the architectural universities and schools. We have to make this much more understandable in the education already, so that the architects, right from the beginning of their studies, learn about this. And then it will just, they will just see the let's say, the beauty of the material and of these solutions. So these are the main two directions, I guess.
Thank you very much, Uwe. I think it's the Kevin Costner motto: if you build it, they will come, right? But any other questions from the floor or from the online? Florian, maybe I have a question then, Uwe. I think that you gave a very good picture of how we can use, let's say, wood to decarbonize our cities. Just want to understand a little bit in terms of innovation and technology. I think that, let's say, in past centuries, building always used first-class or top-quality materials. Now with new, let's say, trees that are 100 years old to get a big beam. Now with all these new innovations, how can we, let's say, picture this change of even using fast-growing species or lower quality timber to actually have the same result. Maybe that's part of the innovation process.
Yeah, in the wood science field, you actually see a lot of innovation going on, where also new types of products are evolving, which will be more configurable, reusable, remanufacturable. Let's say the biggest trend at the moment is, of course, mass timber. It's cross-laminated timber that is driving sort of this boost and this boom. But in the future, we'll also go towards more buildings that you can deconstruct in a way. And that's the idea, to think about a circular economy concept where actually you build a building for a long time, but you can also adapt the building to the needs of the owner with the years, yeah, the family. Then the kids move out. Then you change something in the room. All this you can do with wood construction, because actually it's very advantage as a prefabrication system. All these building tools, they are really developed under a controlled setting in the factory. And once they are ready, they are installed on spot, and it's much faster and much easier to build in a way, and also to adapt.
Okay, thank you very much, Uwe. Sandra, do you have any questions maybe, or no? Or, shall we move on? I don't know. You want to have a quick question, Sandra?
Yeah, but I think it's wonderful to hear, Uwe. We're working in totally different fields, but yet for the same things. So to see your work and what you're doing and telling the world, it's very needed at the moment. Yes.
Thank you, Sandra. Okay, let's move on to our next speaker, then I'll pass the floor to Florian. So Florian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simone. So it is now my pleasure to hand over or to come to the next presentation, and I'm very happy that here we are following the idea, not preaching to the converted. We as the Forestry and Timber section have come here to present to the Housing and Land Management Committee, but we are also inviting speakers from non-forest backgrounds. And the next speaker is from a non-forest background. It is Kit England. He's a group manager for green economy at the Glasgow City Council. And he will show us the journey, how he and his team didn't start with the intention to go into wood, but shows us how they ended up with wood and forestry and forest sector, and how they're working together right now. So, Kit, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you all hear me okay?
You're
Hopefully.
in the back part of the audience, but we can hear you here, yes.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you ever so much for having me with you today. Delighted to be showing what we're doing here in Glasgow. And absolutely delighted also to follow Uwe in his presentation, because...
Kit, sorry to interrupt you. We have a short problem here. The presentation is not yet up there. Sorry. It is.
Okay.
Now it is here. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. Thank you. So yes, very delighted to be following Uwe in sharing what we're doing here in Glasgow, because he spoke so eloquently about what is needed. And so I'm going to talk just briefly about our experience here in Glasgow, where we have moved from an aspiration coming from the sort of the climate change and nature sort of sector, I guess, to combining it with economic development and thinking about whole systems change for a climate smart forest economy. So by way of background, Glasgow, I guess the need to think about how we make a new market for timber and wood and construction to tackle the climate emergency came from a few different factors. So one being the size of the emissions and resilience gaps that we have to bridge. Glasgow has set a target of being net zero carbon by 2030. So there is a very urgent need to make progress. But there is also a recognition that shift to a net zero and climate resilient economy and a city creates a wide range of economic opportunities. And so we want to work collaboratively to make sure that we capture those opportunities as part of the transition. And I think we were also, given the size of that gap and the size of the opportunity, we're also clear, though, that we need to focus on systemic change, really just to make sure that we achieve the targets that we need to achieve. And then here in Scotland, there's been a national commitment to build a nature-positive economy, and they've identified a range of emerging markets to do that. Here within the region, we had already got a groundswell of aspiration around forestry and around nature. So we have our Glasgow and Clyde Valley Green Network Blueprint, which is a £1.1 billion investment plan in the region for restoring forests, nature, peatlands, etc. And similarly, our city regions adaptation strategy and action plan and our regional economic strategy all recognise the need for increasing the amount of nature and wood products. So before COVID, we had a range of, or during the COVID pandemic, we hosted a series of green economy dialogues to inform our priorities for recovery post-COVID. And I won't go through them here, but what they highlighted to us is that there were a range of different areas in which wood and wood products could play a response, whether it's housing retrofit, construction and maintenance, or the idea of using COVID as an opportunity to change direction. So out of our green economy dialogues and our climate plan came the need for a Green Deal. And this is our mechanism which is looking to bridge the gap between our climate targets and our current progress. It's a 9-year mission focused on mobilizing the resources around the economy, around that transformation of decarbonisation, sustainability and justice and equity, really in common with a wider European Green Deal, but also the global Green Deal movement that is underway. We've just published our outcomes framework and action plan. And what we're doing is trying to complement the traditional carbon-centric policies with a strong focus on socioeconomic policy, on governance and on finance as well. So we have this high-level framework. I won't go through the detail of it here too much, but it's focused on systems change. And whilst we're setting out activities that the City Council will take forward, it's meant to be an umbrella framework for mobilising a wide range of different stakeholders in the areas of building new competencies and capabilities, for example, in systems thinking and systems change, but also about providing guide rails, safety rails for Glaswegians as they go through that transition to a net zero climate resilient economy, thinking about our flows of finance to make sure that our financial flows are compatible with the Paris Agreement, thinking about innovative solutions and innovation, but also governance and power distribution, and then thinking about sustainability within our economic planning. And so the work that we're doing around a climate smart forest economy cuts across multiple of those areas. It's an innovative approach, but it's also about building our competencies and capabilities to think in systems and across value chains. It's also about equity. It's also about new governance as well. And the two key elements, one has been a kind of a systems, a portfolio of innovation to systems change. So what we've been doing around nature-based solutions is starting to understand and map our systems and then defining challenges and areas where we need to intervene. And then we're building a portfolio of those solutions with the aim of scaling and replicating them to create exponential change. We also joined the EU's Systems Innovation Programme through the Horizon Europe missions on climate neutral and smart cities. And we're complementing this with a wider market making role. So we recognise that cities can also have a really strong role to play in making the new markets that are needed for the new economies. So whether it's nature-based solutions, as we're talking here, or in hydrogen, there's an opportunity for cities to adopt a challenge-led approach that is quite similar to being used at the kind of global level in hard-to-abate sectors, where it's about defining a challenge and bringing together a coalition of the willing to address them. And what we're doing is we're tailoring this approach to the city and the regional scale, so using design thinking, co-design and new evidence generation methods, and thinking across both the supply side in the economy and the demand side, and what are the relevant levers of change that we have to make it happen. So it's still very much an approach that we're learning and adjusting on, But the early work has been around this climate smart forest economy program, where we have been selected as part of a global program in partnership with Climate Kick, with the World Economic Forum and the Nature Conservancy, to be one of 8 breakthrough initiatives across the world that are trying to create the climate smart forest economy overall. So in Glasgow, just to dive into that program, we have an ambitious sort of approach, which is trying to leverage forests to turn buildings into those long-term carbon stores, resulting in a substantive climate positive impact. So the climate change plan here in Scotland sets ambitious targets for increasing forest and woodland creation, while our national strategy for economic transformation talks about that need for a net zero and nature positive economy. And then at the same time, I'll come to talk in a little bit of detail in a second, but we've identified intervention points across the value chains and systems where we think we can intervene to build that local new economy. And we've also brought together organizations across the value chain from the public and the private sectors to make it happen. So underpinning the approach that we've had has been thinking about the evidence. So one of the 2 work streams that we've had, one has been focusing on evidence and one has been focusing on on coalitions and interventions as a result. So the first question was, how big is the carbon saving potential from adopting this kind of approach? And we used a framework called the 3S framework. So thinking about forests or wood as a sink, the storage of carbon in wood products, and then the substitution from using that wood compared to steel or concrete in construction. And we ran some analysis looking at the relevant savings in carbon that could be made from those particular elements. And we've also built partnerships in each of those different spaces. So on the sink side of things, we have the Glasgow and the Clyde Climate Forest, which is looking to plant 18 million trees in the city region by 2030. In the built environment, we have an innovation centre, Built Environment Smarter Transformation, but also a partnership of different construction companies called Offsite Solutions Scotland, who are looking at offsite manufacturing using timber. And then in substitution, we have the city and the wider region as a planning authority, which can think in that space. And the evidence has shown us that from a carbon perspective, the savings are very good. The other piece of work, which I'm not going to talk about so much today, but has been also estimating the labour market impacts and the economic impacts of that shift as well. And those 2 pieces together have been very important, because the kind of efficiency driven through offsite manufacturing is great to help enable the carbon savings, but it does have some employment impacts, and we have to think quite carefully about what that will mean for our construction sector. So the work that we did was we worked with this coalition of organizations and brought them together to structure the wood value chain and identify interventions made by the public and the private sectors that could help us realize that chain. So whether it's from forest creation and management, from raw materials, from processing and manufacture, from specifications and standards, all the way through to design and construction and the built environment. And what you'll see there is that they are very diverse and varied. So we have at the sort of top left, we have skills and training, but also the afforestation of vacant and derelict land, and risk reduction and resilience of forests through diversification. Through the top, at the sort of top centre, we have demand stimulation through best practice and procurement, and investments in Scottish locally based timber processing and manufacturing. We have skills again in terms of manufacturing and material properties. There are a set of interventions that are needed around specifications and standards, a set around design and redefining value and what we mean by value, but also scaling modern methods of construction and showcasing new brands of timber as well, sort of demonstration type buildings, as was previously talked about. And then in the middle, a range of public sector market shaping efforts around sort of planning, but also supply chain investment and building that coalition of actors. We then worked in a second stage to refine that down into a smaller number of interventions, which collectively the public and the private sector are agreed are the needed things. So these have come into the common narrative. So number 1, going from left to right, further developing the forest to frame value narrative and the economic case. The second has been about a just transition mechanism, because we think that there'll be a significant re and upskilling requirement for the sector to go down this approach. But we also think there's something that as a city we can do around a common business or investment case for offsite manufacturing, but obviously that needs the private sector to come to the table sort of after a certain point. There's a piece around changing the buildings specifications and standards in Scotland and engaging with the government around that. There's a piece about public sector demand and market shaping through planning policies, and then a kind of cluster of demonstration buildings and developments in the city as well. So we're now at the point that, having done that early development work, we're seeking funding to do the implementation now. So we're working with a number of different organizations to potentially look at co-funding that kind of implementation piece now and developing actions in each of those different areas. And just briefly, the takeaway learnings from us. I think the work that we've done to date has shown that the approach can create those systemic shifts which design out the hard to reach carbon while promoting economic development and prosperity. Cities and regions can be crucial actors in actually making those new markets. They can bridge silos, sectors and systems and engage with the right people and convene them. But they need to rethink their structures, competencies and capabilities to do so. That approach also needs a broad perspective. So instead of focusing on just forestry or just construction or circularity in buildings, you've got to look across the whole set of systems, across the whole value chain, thinking both about supply and demand and what relevant levers of change you have. And it also needs to be convened and co-designed with those array of actors, because otherwise there's no buy-in or no appetite for that change. And not everyone sees the collective value from working on their individual parts. And I think if this had purely been framed as a nature or climate or an economic development initiative, I'm not sure it would have worked so far. I think it's been enabled very much by our ownership and leadership, which is specifically sitting at the intersection of both through our green economy unit here in Glasgow. So I hope that's been a helpful overview of the work that we're doing. And I'm very, very happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kit, for your presentation and this insight into your journey, where you were started and where you are at right now in Glasgow. I think we can only congratulate you for your activities so far, and we understand it's uncharted territory for a city engaging with other sectors and going, across the different silos of knowledge and expertise. My question right now would be, how is the response from the forest sector in terms of thinking about the partnership? Do they welcome you with open arms, and do they see this opportunity? And also then the other question I have, the second one is, since it's uncharted territory, do you have other cities who are in the same position, who you peer learn with, who you contact? How do you develop your plans and next actions?
So on the question about the forestry sector, I think we have tried to engage as many different partners as possible from the start of the process. So I think it's one of those cases where if you want to go far, you've actually got to start slow and be very inclusive. So we have been engaging with the forest sector, and the Clyde Climate Forest has been one of the crucial partners in the early stages, and they've been very supportive. So I think that's been really, really helpful. But it has taken time, because everyone needs to understand the overall benefits that can be realized and the role that they have to play individually in that collective process. We've been very fortunate to have had philanthropic funding from the Good Energies Foundation, which has allowed us to take forward that piece of work and given the space for partners to think about that. And now what we're starting to see is that process is accelerating, and we can go more quickly than we sort of did at the start. I think your point about networks is also very important. We've been fortunate through one of the ways we've been fortunate is that through Climate Kick and the kind of the forest economy program is not just Glasgow is one of the 8 different approaches that are being piloted. So we've been working and exchanging ideas that way. And the other has been the World Economic Forum hosts a sustainable mass timber community group. which has been bringing together different cities and different practitioners as well. And we've been attending those meetings and learning about, approaches that are happening across Europe and internationally as well. So we've been very fortunate in that regard. But I definitely think that has been helpful too, because it sort of shows you that you're not trying to do this on your own, but you're part of a broader global movement as well.
Thank you. You have another question from the panel? Yeah, there's one from Sandra, please.
Hello, kids. Very nice to hear everything that's going on in Glasgow. I have a question, since we're talking about public and private initiatives, and that is that the city of Glasgow, normally the municipalities are very good at making documents and implementing those, but they are also big developers and are ordering schools, nursery homes, and hospitals and everything. Is the city of Glasgow also ordering buildings out of timber?
So not yet. So we need to be doing much more in that space. I think one of the challenges that our procurement team faces is that everybody comes to them with the thing that they want them to do. So we have, whether it's thinking about social initiatives or mitigation or circularity or resilience, their challenge, I think, is struggling around is around balancing all of those tensions. But we definitely realize that procurement can be a lever for those initiatives. We already have a Glasgow City Region City Deal, which is a £1.1 billion infrastructure investment programme. And that programme, it started out, a good number of years ago now, and it wasn't really thinking about sustainability. It was very traditional sort of infrastructure programme, but that has changed quite a bit to the point where we are starting to, incorporate, emissions profiles as part of the business case process, those kinds of things, which will inevitably lead to a more developed procurement approach. So I think that in some ways the procurement is an important lever for us and one we need to be doing more on. But actually, if we're able to catalyse a broader city transition with the private sector, the impact will probably be multiplied, significantly more so than just focusing on our own procurement as well.
Okay, there's another question from Simone, a quick one.
Yeah, very quick one. Thanks, Kit. Maybe just wondering if aside from the procurement or public procurement side, you've also looked at, let's say, tax incentives or tax or disincentives for those who actually build using wood or other biomaterials. Thanks.
So it's a really great question, and a number of cities and places in the UK have been looking at sort of carbon offset taxes effectively for planning and development. So there are some good examples in the UK, in Milton Keynes and in London, where it's not necessarily been a wood first policy, but there have been offset, developers have been asked to pay a certain amount per ton of carbon that's emitted that has then gone into a general fund to use for mitigation projects. I think one of the things that we are going to be pushing, the planning policy is set at the national level for these things. So it's very difficult for us as a city to just go in and sort of say, we would like a wood first construction, please. Instead, what we need to be doing is influencing the Scottish government and their planning sort of policies there to make sure that we are able to do that as well. And it's definitely something that, as part of our market shaping initiatives, we will be talking about, because there have been, I think, as others have hinted at, there have been some situations where there are quite a few perhaps unfounded concerns about the use of wood as a construction material, whether it's for fire or for safety or strength or whatever. And so we need to do more in that space as well. So it's definitely on the cards. We're investigating the idea of revenue raising through development in that space, and we're engaging with the Scottish Government as well.
Thank you, Kit, for the time being. So we will come back to a bigger question to the panelists later on, but now I have the pleasure to move on to the next short statement. It is not a presentation. that is presented. So from the first two presentations, we learned that wood is one of the best bio-based materials for low-carbon construction in the future, and we understand why the forest sector and cities have a strong interest in bio-based materials. But there are also other important actors who are key in making low-carbon construction a reality, especially for private homeowners who want to invest and build in new buildings. So we now have the privilege to have with us Mr. Erik Kelkut. He's product manager at a bank called Triodos Bank in the Netherlands. Erik, please provide us with a very short introduction to your bank and or what you do, and please answer the question, why did your bank start to give low-carbon mortgages, and what is the role of wood in that?
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to contribute here. As you mentioned, Triodos is a Dutch founded bank active in 5 European countries. It's a small bank, a sustainable bank, and a social inclusive bank. And our goal is to accelerate the energy transition. And we try to do that by financing change, but also change finance. We announced that the COP in Glasgow, actually, that we want to reach a net zero target, so no carbon emissions in 2035. Also, as being a bank, so not only our own carbon, but also for every client we finance. And in that regard, that's an ambitious goal. We introduced what we call a bio-based mortgage. And the bio-based mortgage is the first mortgage in the world, we believe, that stimulates the use of choosing a carbon neutral material by literally giving a discount on the interest rate of the mortgage. So when using CO2 neutral materials such as wood, which we talk about a lot today, instead of concrete and steel, but also replacing the oil-based insulations by the wood fiber, or insulations with straw or flax or other materials that can contribute heavily to CO2 neutral worlds. And actually, the construction phase is a phase where a lot of CO2 emissions took place. So we reward this by choosing a standard that's called the Environmental Performance Indicator. In the Netherlands, you have to apply for a building permit for a single building, but also for a large apartment, and already show what your environmental performance indicator is. It's not ideal, but that performance indicator is for us the basis to stimulate homeowners to choose materials that are carbon neutral. So that's our, let's say, way of changing finance and financing change.
Thank you. So are there other questions here from the panelists? Thank you, Erik, to your presentation. So thank you for this very good insight. There is a question from Sandra.
Yeah, it's lovely to hear this from a bank. Finally, a good, yeah. But there is also, and I can see this is very good for all these private persons building their new homes and everything, but even developers needs to have money for bigger projects. And that is the next level, I hope, and that we really, everybody needs to see quite quick now. The green mortgages for bio-based building materials. It's lovely in my ears. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
I think the question was, are you moving up one level, or are you still going to be working with it?
No, we are trying, and what we also very much are interested in is also in let's say, the transition of the current existing built environment, there's a huge task for all of us to also improve the energy efficiency of that homes. And I think wood and wood-based insulation materials can play a very important role in that aspect as well. So we are really trying to focus and to stimulate also the construction builders to further improve here. Talk also about insurance companies and other banks. And so there is a lot of, let's say, misunderstanding about the quality of wood, which we don't agree with. Wood is a very good material to build with. Actually, as you're looking here behind me, our own office is also a wood-based building, and it's very healthy. It's a very nice environment to work in. So there's a lot of misunderstanding that we together, maybe present here, have the ability to change if we spread the word.
Okay, thank you. I also have a quick follow-up question regarding the performance indicators that you just mentioned. As a bank, you are a financial institution and you finance projects, but who is the key partner for you to enable a bank to take a decision whether or not a project is carbon neutral? I don't know if you have any clarification on that.
Yeah, as I explained in the Dutch building regulations, there is a KPI, that's the built environment indicator. But actually that built environmental indicator needs to be improved, in my opinion. So all materials have to be in there. The building construction world is a bit old-fashioned maybe in some way. And if we want to improve the use of that materials and the carbon effect of all those materials needs to be calculated and rewarded well. That could be in software, Paris-proof software. And I think it's very important that you set a target on local or national government level about the way you would like your buildings to be constructed, and especially what materials you reward positively and what materials you would like to avoid in your buildings. I think that's a very important next step in these discussions.
Thank you for the clarification. I think that is very important to note that you really depend on the legislator and decision makers outside to put the right framework conditions. Thank you very much. We will come back to the kind of final question at the closing round, but we will have one more speaker. I will therefore hand over to Simone.
Yes, thank you, Florian. So I think we've heard quite a bit of different points of view, looking at actors that provide the knowledge, the political will, the commitment, and importantly, the financing for, let's say, building with biomaterials. Now, maybe we'll hear the point of view of a practical, or practitioner rather, could maybe give us the point of view of the builder and the contractor. So we have the pleasure to have with us on the podium Ms. Sandra Frank from Arvet, a Swedish company. And Sandra, your company has started really as a pure contracting company, but now you've slowly changed the way in which you operate and think about implementation. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your company and how you ended up using bio-based materials and more specifically wood in your work. Over to you, Sandra.
Thank you, Simone. I'm so happy to be here, and especially that there is banks included in these discussions finally. I'm Sandra Frank, and we have this company called Arvet, and up till 3 years ago our name was Folkhem, and by then we were both contractors and developers. So we built, actually at the time, the world's highest apartment building totally out of timber. So everything above ground was is in CLT. It's the elevator shaft, the structure, the facade, the roof, everything. And we did it out of, our CEO is very, has been working with an urgency for environmental issue for many, many years, but before in bigger construction companies where he realized that the movement was going too slow. So we need, as Ove was saying, we really need showcases. We need these buildings so that we can see that they are real, they are lovely to live in, they're good for the carpenters to build, and they're actually good for the economy. Also because I realized just sitting here that it's almost exactly 10 years ago since we put up the first wall. And it was prefabricated, actually up to 80%, up in the north of Sweden where the forest is, the knowledge of living out of the forest, the carpenters, the job opportunities. And then we built the houses up there and drove it down to the city of Stockholm and mounted it in 7 months. And realizing the difference in how you have to cut off a city center for 7 months than normally more than 2 years, it's economically a fantastic win for the city. And also the fastness as seeing this building as an investment instead of a cost. Then we realized, because at first we thought that this was going to be more expensive than building a normal concrete building. And we didn't realize until afterwards when we sat down and thinking that it was quite the opposite. Because instead of building this house in about 22 months, which is very normal, we built it in 7 months. So we could actually use the same amount of construction workers to building 3 houses instead of 1. We could actually use the same amount of money, borrowing the same amount of money to 3 houses instead of 1. And comparing if you're selling the houses later on and you get the money back after 7 months instead of after 22 months, or if it's a rental building, you get the rental in after 7 months instead of after more than two years. So we also need to look at this in a total different way than the construction companies have. We have been calculating in our own way and not as an investment, but as a cost.
Thank you very much, Sandra. I think I like your last statement. It's about investing and not it's looking at costs. But I think Uwe mentioned earlier the issue of people's perception of wood. It's like it's dangerous, it's going to go on fire, it's going to burn, or it's not as safe as concrete. Maybe you could tell us a little bit what has been your perception with the market once you had to sell or rent out these houses?
Yeah, I think I told you, we didn't realize what we were doing actually 10 years ago. So this house has a life of its own, I would say. I've been traveling around the planet for many, many years, been invited to talk about this, and we've had more than 20,000 visitors from 150 different countries. And that is people from almost all the countries around the world. And I realized one thing, and it is when you open the door and people go into the room or into the house, we all do the same. Whether you're from China, South America, Canada, Africa, or wherever. And normally there has been a lot of very busy people. You could see the stress level is quite real. But what they all do is, when you enter the building, you take a big breath because you want, the smell is there. And I think those are things we need to talk about. In a new city environment, how do we, as human beings, how do we perceive it? And what does it mean during a stressful day just to take one big breath? What happens inside of you? And how come we all want this smell? to come to be a part of us. So that's one really something that I've noticed just observing all these people. But also about the fire, that was the main issue 10 years ago, and everybody was asking about it. But I would say today, almost nobody even asked the question. We are a lot more aware, and I think there is where we need to come together, because we have different regulations and different testing in every country, and sometimes even in different regions within a country. But timber burns exactly the same whether it burns here in San Marino or in Sweden or in Canada. So we have so many experiences that we can share, and hopefully for the future have more common regulations, and that we really share experiences.
Any other questions from the floor or from the panel here? Florian or Uwe, you have any questions for Sandra or suggestions?
No, I can echo what you just said about how people perceive these buildings when they are the first time in it. We also have been discussing a lot with architects, and they say it's exactly this way how to, convince people about it. For example, there are also a lot of houses where you can go and stay there to see it, to feel it, before you do the decision to buy a new home, for example. So I think this is one big way where we should go also more in the direction with wood. It sounds really convincing what you say.
Thank you very much, Uwe. I do the same with a tree. I'm an urban forester. I go and sit, when I'm stressed, I go sit under a tree and take a big breath, but I know the feeling. So I think at this point I'll give the floor back to Florian to ask maybe a last round or last question to the panelists. So Florian, back to you.
Yeah, that's the 1 million tree question to all the panelists. Just a quick wrap up of the session. We already passed, we're close to the end. But the last question is to all of you, what would you change, or what is the biggest obstacle to have more wood used in the built environment in cities? You can take it from your background and have a response to that. I will start from the bottom up. So I will start with Sandra, and then we come back to Eric. Sandra, what would you change? What would be the biggest obstacle? What do you think?
It's actually, I would say it's cultural. It's so easy to do the same thing that we did today and do it tomorrow. So to change the culture, and I can see at the universities, at research companies, there is still, the professors are teaching the students today what they learned, and we need to have more pieces, more houses like this, so that, because as soon as you have built one of these houses, you do not want to go back to using materials that will never grow back, that are some of the, I'm thinking of the flight industry is letting out more than double the amount than just to making the cement that we later on need sand to make concrete. And that we need to talk about these issues. We need to talk about how are we building our cities today, and put our eyes on what is that, and how can we make renewable cities and make the houses as carbon sinks.
Thank you. Next question, or next answer from Eric. What would, from a perspective of bank, what would you hope to get improved, and what are the big bottlenecks for you to use more bio-based, low-carbon materials in the built environment for especially private homeowners?
Yes, what would be really helpful, as I mentioned in my previous short presentation, is that on a government level, national, maybe European or local, this needs to be included in the building regulations. That really helps us then to divide whether we would like to finance it or not. And the last thing that I see, if this will become common practice, we need, of course, a lot of production forests here. Do that close by in Europe. It will help for our environment as well. But be also aware of where the wood comes from and produce it locally with the intent to build with. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you. That is very valuable and well taken. Now I hand the floor to Kit England from Glasgow. What is your biggest hurdle in making progress?
Thanks, Florian. I would say two things. So, but I'll be quick on both. So I think the first is around systems thinking and systems change. And really the institutions like cities need to rethink from moving from a sort of siloed perspective to how do we create systemic and deliver systemic change across multiple sectors and multiple systems in one go. And then I think the second is around the practical challenges around the procurement and the legal advice and things of doing that, because public-private collaborations are excellent, but when it comes down to investments and decisions and things like that, there can be a lot of barriers to working very collaboratively at that kind of detailed implementation. So those would be my two: systems thinking and systems change practices in cities and regions, and then procurement and legal for deep collaboration when you've done that.
Thank you for that feedback. And the last will be the first. The first is the last. I hand it back to Uwe Kies for his comment on what could be done from his perspective to have more bio-based or wood material used in construction.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think I can agree with all the statements that were said before, and just to add also another perspective, or just to strengthen this perspective of research and development, wood is a really high-tech material already today, but we can go even further there. Yeah, mass timber, mass construction, building with wood is well known as an established technology. You have heard it. It's working. People appreciate the result. But wood is now, for the time being, a highly engineered product, but it's not yet circular to the extent that it could be. So as I pointed out in the beginning, we could think of deconstructible buildings. We could think of buildings as material banks, actually, where it's not demolished at the end, but the material can be reused and can actually also enter account sheets and assets. So it's an investment, as we just said. And there needs to be more research and development into this kind of circular systems, circular building systems, new engineered wood products that fit this kind of purposes. And we need much more education and training in the schools so that actually the planners, the architects, and also the construction, the civil engineering sector learn about the solutions and innovate in that direction.
Okay, thank you very much, Uwe. I think that was a great conclusion to the panel. I think we really had a very good discussion today. And I think the mix that we managed to put together, I think really gave us a comprehensive picture of the challenges that lay ahead of let's say, reduced or zero carbon cities. I think what we heard from Uwe, and I think is very important, is the idea that the European Union is taking this seriously. The new European Bauhaus can be really an engine for this change. However, there are still some challenges and obstacles to overcome. We heard, I think, from all the speakers here that it is possible to actually move forward with the idea of low energy buildings, green buildings, using biomaterials such as wood to really reduce the carbon footprint of cities and construction. However, there needs to be a paradigm shift. We need to really have the industry, but also the market really realize, and I think Sandra gave some fantastic ideas of how easy it is to demonstrate that wood construction is more efficient, more, let's say, energy saving, and easy to sell, because people feel happier. In a way, it's about people's happiness, and it's quite easy to actually make, or not easy, but we can make it happen, let's put it this way. We heard, I think, in the last part of what some of these key obstacles are, and I think we heard from Eric that regulatory aspects are very important. We need to really look at how the countries regulate their investment or their type of construction. I think Sandra also mentioned that every country, every region has different regulations. Unless we have similar regulations, it's also difficult to think of a homogeneous market, because then if you want to export technology from Sweden, that might not match the standards in Greece, or might not match the standards in Belgium or so on. So really having these common standards that can help both the industry but also the banks in giving loans is definitely an important point. One thing I like from Glasgow is really an example of how a city can actually take action and lead the way in changing the market in a way, but also creating economic opportunities for the city, linking the forest sector directly with the city. And even though there's still some steps to be taken in terms of system thinking and maybe an integrated multi-stakeholder approach, the direction is that of really moving into co-design, co-planning, co-management of the city. And I think that's a way in which we need to move, not forgetting somehow, and I think that was mentioned quite clearly, Kit mentioned it, the idea of equity. So it's also about creating equity also in the way of having equal opportunities for people to actually be able to enjoy, let's say, good quality housing at maybe a reasonable price, and sometimes with the support of the state. I think Uwe also gave a good conclusion about the need for moving to the next level, which is a circular use of wood. We build, we deconstruct, we reuse, we basically create a Lego system in which we can, build blocks and take out and put things back again. And that's, I think, normally frowned upon, because if you can reuse it, it lasts longer. And many industries don't want that. They want it to last not too long, so people have to buy something new. So I think that's also an important paradigm shift. And I think last but not least, it's about creating awareness that this is possible, but also creating the capacity to make it happen. So we need to operate on two fronts. On the one hand, we need to convince, let's say, the countries, the states, the regulatory bodies, and the customers that this is important in terms of saving the planet, if we want to say, put it very high. But we also need to, let's say, influence the training centers, the universities, the schools, in order to have the capacity to also make this happen. So in the end, how do we turn this cost into an investment is really by having the laws, the framework, the capacity, and maybe the financing to make it happen. So I think I'll probably close here at this point. I'd like to thank Florian for co-facilitating with me, and of course all our fantastic speakers today. And I really hope that this will be the beginning of a wider new collaboration among the different sectors to make sure things change for the good. Thank you all, and thank you for all the people who are here with us in the room and online listening today. And we hope that you learned something. I definitely learned a lot today. I always come to these things to listen, learn, and make friends. And I think that was really a good atmosphere today. So thank you all, and happy continuation of the conference.